As a loser who spends most of his time browsing the web, there are few things in life I can claim to be an expert or aficionado in. The list is so small, I'm gonna go ahead and lay them all out for you. Pokémon, memes, what all those extremely influential people were doing on Epstein's Island, and horror. The last of which is something I rarely ever get the chance to talk about, so I want to change that with this video. But before I start bitching, let me clarify what exactly I mean when I say I'm an expert on horror. Am I saying I could create a truly bone-chilling, psychologically disturbing, nightmare-inducing novel or film? No, but I could do a hell of a lot better than the schmucks trying to right now. Those on the internet, that is. Yeah, it's an open secret that finding quality, scary content online is hit or miss. You know, in the same way that leaving Detroit with your wallet is hit or miss. Okay, but seriously, what makes me a voice of authority on this? Well, I'm not trying to sound cool by saying this, but I really don't get scared easily. It takes a lot of effort to put genuine fear in me. So when something does, that's when I know it's good. Regardless, it's even easier to tell when horror is bad, because most of the time it comes off as laughable. Finally, we get to the main point of today's video. I'm going to be looking at some of the most horrific content that the online world has ever produced, and maybe at the end, we'll come to some conclusion as to why it sucks. If not, it'll at least be fun to point and laugh. This isn't going to be an exact history lesson, but I do want to start at where the horror genre first took off online, that being with creepypasta. You see, creepypasta is a play on the words of creepy and copypasta, which was blah blah blah. You guys probably already know all this. Instead of boring you with precise context, let's just go over why they got so popular across the web. Firstly, to give credit where credit is due, some of the early stories were well written and could definitely give you a good scare if you were reading it from your monitor alone late at night. Ted the Caver, Baraska, and Slenderman are all classics in the genre for a reason. Secondly, and more importantly, is actually in the namesake. A huge reason these stories proliferated is because they could be easily copy and pasted amongst forums, emails, etc. Hell, as cliche as it sounds, I even remember the kids at summer camp one year retelling creepypastas amongst each other before bed. The first creepypastas had the same appeal of any urban legend. However, not all were created equal. It takes a very skilled writer to create the atmosphere needed for a good horror story. And it's not controversial to say that your average Joe online types at a 4th grade reading level. Luckily for them, popularity isn't actually based on quality 9 times out of 10. So even if they wrote complete schlock, it could still get featured in a corpse husband video just because it had the moniker of creepypasta. It's sort of like how people are famous for being famous. They aren't talented in any way, they just market themselves well and ride off the coattails of more popular figures. For example, Squidward's suicide. I really don't think anyone would have cared about this if it weren't a creepypasta about one of the most popular shows of the last decade. This story is a prime example of everything wrong with creepypastas. Amateur writing only scary to a 10-year-old? Check. Unimaginative imagery thrown in for shock factor? Check. Shitty photoshopped image? You fucking know it. All that, topped with unearned popularity, was a recipe for oversaturation. While poor quality wasn't exclusive to it, this genre of cursed kids media is some of the most rotten garbage to come out of the creepypasta craze of the early 2010s, and I want to do a rundown of some of the worst ones. While I started with Squidward's suicide, it really began with a story on 4chan's paranormal board by the title of Been Drowned. I'm going to skip the synopsis on all of these stories since you're a smart viewer and can go find a plot summary on Wikipedia. Instead, I'll just share my thoughts on why they do or don't work. In the case of Been Drowned, I think the story would be a lot better if, instead of the crybaby OP being the narrator, it was the angry video game nerd. He could call Ben a urinal cake or whatever, and we'd all have a good laugh instead of the melodramatic nonsense the story is failing to convey now. Okay, all jokes aside, this is actually the best of the creepypastas I'm about to talk about. I can at least give hats off to the creator for making a recreation of the story by modding and recording actual gameplay. It's also hurt retroactively since Stories to Follow just copied elements from it, and they became tropes after the fact. You can't exactly blame OP for that. Speaking of being copied, here we have suicidemouse.avi. Basically the same shtick as Squidward's suicide, which is funny because that story apparently came out a few weeks after Suicide Mouse. Now this might be controversial to say, but I think one might have taken a little inspiration from the other. Next up, we have a pasta about another franchise everyone should be familiar with, Pokémon. Actually, there's been several creepypastas about the pocket monsters, but easily the most notorious is Lavender Town Syndrome. While it's certainly stupid now, I gotta give it props for actually being a somewhat believable folktale. Saying that the Game Boy's sound font has frequencies which make people want to kill themselves is not too far off from the truth. However, this story once again suffers from the fact that only children should be scared of it. Last, and probably least, is Sonic.exe. Not sure what I can say about this that I haven't said about the others. The only noteworthy talking point here is that it's now best known for being a Friday Night Funkin' mod. And that fate actually is pretty terrifying. Eventually, people caught on to the tropes at play here, and creepypastas have since turned into a bit of a meme because of it. I'm sure when most people read these stories now, they're laughing at the mention of hyper-realistic eyes rather than trembling. Even though they fell out of grace with those in the online horror community, they were extremely influential for shaping its future. In particular, there are 3 remnants of creepypasta's popularity which are still around today: cheesy YouTube narrators, cursed media, and spooky twists on children's content. Let's waste no time and get into the first of those. YouTube is ubiquitous online, so it's no surprise that when something gets even just mildly popular, it will find its way there in some form. For creepypastas, people began reading them for videos, and as with every trend, it was eventually flanderized. The declining quality of good creepypasta narration paralleled the decline of the pastas themselves. Doing a serious, extremely low voice is fine when the story you're reading is good enough to warrant it, but as soon as you start using that voice on shit like, "Never let your children watch the adventures of Professor Egghead," it becomes comically melodramatic. However, it didn't stop at shitty creepypastas. This habit of doing over-the-top narration bled into the ranked list genre, and it has spawned some hilarious out-of-context clips.
Number 7. Student watches porn and gets naked.
Cloud and his team end up going after a superhuman named Separath.
Number 13. McPizza and McSpaghetti.
Honestly, if I saw that damn thing in my living room, I'd stomp on it until it was a small brown stain.
Number 12. Cock.
Burger King foot lettuce. The last thing you'd want in your Burger King burger is someone's foot fungus, but as it turns out, that might be what you get.
Okay, honestly, I only did this section so I could include those. These corny narrations aren't making internet horror worse per se, but they are symptomatic of its lack in quality. Let's move on to something a little more related to the main thesis, cursed media, and specifically analog horror. This genre is something which isn't exactly unique to the internet, but spawned around the same time as it. The Blair Witch Project pioneered this style in 1999, and it took off on the internet about a decade later with Marble Hornets and Slender Man. Granted, it was called found footage back then, but it's basically the same idea when you boil things down. While Marble Hornets had a bunch of crappy knockoffs itself, I'm going to go ahead and skip about another decade forward so we can talk about this idea of cursed media in a modern context. Local 58 is really where this current trend started. Just like Blair Witch and Marble Hornets, I actually think it's a pretty straightforward and well-told story, which can certainly give you a good scare. Also, just like Marble Hornets, it got a bunch of untalented people trying and failing to recreate what made it good. One of the first of these to gain popularity was the Mandela Catalog. Remember when I said at the beginning of this video I could do better than a lot of the horror online today? Yeah, I was mainly referring to shit like this. Now, I tried watching a series summary of the Mandela Catalog a while back, but not even Wendigoon could make me interested enough to pay attention. Let me give it another shot though before I rag on it anymore. Alright, so I rewatched Wendigoon's videos on the Mandarin analog, and can confidently say that if you find Uncanny Mr. Incredible videos scary, then you'll be trembling in fear watching this. After the Scrimblow files, the floodgates on shitty, repetitive analog horror was opened. Every art student and goth chick wanted to capture success with their own series. I don't even blame them because the formula for making one is so simple. Create some innocuous piece of media, preferably one that looks like something you could have seen on TV as a kid, throw a pre-installed VHS filter on it, maybe some TV scan lines if you're feeling brave. Finally, add your spooky twist by making it uncanny in some way. Usually that's going to mean opening up Photoshop and using the liquefy tool on a still frame of some guy's face. That's all it takes to make an analog horror series. Now all you have to do is upload it and wait for some generic video essayists to analyze the hidden meaning which you shoehorned into it. Now that I've established the analog formula, I'll give you an example of what I mean. Here's one based on South Park. Let's see how many of the steps I just listed these videos check off. Actually, I'm not even going to bother. It's literally all of them. In fact, this is so cliche and awful, I think it's just a parody of the genre. I can't tell though, because there are serious analog horror videos out there which are equally as terrible, so I wouldn't exactly be surprised if this were genuine. The last analog horror series I want to discuss is The Walton Files. Honestly, I don't dislike this one, but it's also a far stretch to say it's amazing. I mean, there's some good moments of atmosphere here and there, and if nothing else, it seems to have had a bit of effort put into it. In fact, it's all well made, but there is one glaring issue I have with it. That being the fact it unapologetically echoes Five Nights at Freddy's and its story. The creators should have either come up with something more original, or just set the story firmly in the FNAF universe. Making your series a deliberate Chinese knockoff of FNAF isn't doing it any favors. The topic of Five Nights at Freddy's actually brings us to the next and final element of mediocre internet spookies. Mascot horror is the newest scary craze online. It's basically taking children's characters and adding a creepy twist to them. It started when the aforementioned game, Five Nights at Freddy's, took off in popularity around 9 years ago. Once again, this massive attention was warranted because FNAF itself is a solid horror game. However, the general public has a tendency to take something good and pervert it into a soulless slop. This happened to FNAF on all fronts, from shitty fan art to low-effort YouTube videos and questionable fan games. I could make an entire video on this FNAF craze, so I'll stop myself there. You see, the main reason this mania happened was due to the fact that Freddy and his friends are, in essence, kids' characters, and kids are marketing teams' favorite targets due to their tendency to latch onto the hip new thing and consume as much of it as possible. This combination of an untapped brand of horror and the huge audience it inherently attracts caught the attention of many opportunists across the web. The first game to take notes from FNAF was Bendy and the Ink Machine. Truth be told, I've never seen anything about this game, but honestly, there's probably a good reason for that because it seems very lame. Also, a FNAF fan game already did the shtick of making old Disney cartoons spooky, so minus points for lack of originality. Next to hop on the coattails of mascot horror was Hello Neighbor. And this game I know even less about. From what I do know, I genuinely failed to see what the hell is scary about it. In fact, I don't even think it was trying to be. Instead, it seems to be attempting to attract a following using hidden lore. And that's actually another aspect of mascot horror which FNAF is responsible for. I can tell that was Hello Neighbor's goal due to their blatant pestering of one Matthew Patrick, the acclaimed game theorist. MatPat was getting a lot of views for his FNAF and Bendy theories because of, once again, kids. And I guess the people behind Hello Neighbor thought his audience would be succulent enough to leech off of. In fact, this reliance on hidden lore to get people talking about your game is so much of a common strategy in mascot horror that I prefer to call the genre MatPat bait. This genre was growing a lot of traction by 2018, so people were already starting to parody it, particularly Baldi's Basics. While it was clearly satire, it gained the same following as any other mascot horror game because kids couldn't tell the difference. Despite people noticing how obnoxious this trend in horror games was, its momentum didn't slow. In 2021, the first chapter of a game called Poppy's Playtime was released. It was just more of the same, and the only notable thing about it was that it had some thought-out gameplay, which, trust me, is a rarity. Let's get away from video games for a bit, because this disease has spread well beyond the confines of gaming. Later in 2021, a trailer for a show called Come and Learn with Pibby was released. Even though I'd argue it was more action than horror, that didn't stop people from overreacting and trying to milk it all the same. It also led to this tweet, which summarizes mascot horror perfectly. that's not even the most ridiculous this fad gets. It all crescendos in God's year of 2023 with the Garden of Ban game series. What can I say about this that hasn't been said already? It's just, it's peak. Ban transcends your usual map bait video game. This is not only the best game I've had the pleasure of experiencing, but the most impactful work of art I've ever taken in through my senses. This is all without mentioning the spine-tingling chills you'll receive through the horrific experience it provides. Garden of Ban is mascot horror perfected, and I won't Stinger Flynn to bear my children. Well, I've pretty much talked about all the garbage horror media across the internet. Now let's assess what we can learn from these various examples. For me, there's one clear through line with everything I've talked about. Some form of scary content is published online. Being well made and bringing something new and genuinely chilling to the genre, it gains widespread praise. This notoriety and innovation leads to people trying to capture their own success by utilizing elements from the original. Eventually, these copycats become increasingly low effort, and a once novel format is now tired and flanderized. Now, you can say that about a lot of trends on the World Wide Web, but here's why it's especially bad for something trying to be scary. While horror is a little bit subjective, it also relies heavily on that innate fear of the unknown. When something becomes so overdone that you can predict it step by step, you lose a lot of that thrill which comes from not knowing what lurks in the shadows. With that said, I really want to make clear that this video is more about getting across that message rather than picking on any of the creators I featured in this video. I mean, who the fuck am I to be so harsh to someone trying to create something? Even if it's not the most original piece of art in the world, they're doing more than me who's just making derivative commentary about it. Except Garden of Ban, those guys are making a blatant cash grab. Now that I've spent the entirety of the video yucking others' yum, what kind of horror do I actually enjoy? For me, it's text-to-speech stories from 4chan's Paranormal Board. Okay, maybe that thing I said at the beginning about being a horror aficionado was a bit of a stretch. Hello? Hello?